The Galactic Heritage Museum of Vorreth Prime was, without any exaggeration whatsoever, the most prestigious institution in the known universe. And yes, I am saying that with complete sincerity, because I work there, and my supervisor reads all internal communications. My name is Draven Oxis, Senior Curator, Third Wing, Biological Relics and Extinction Displays. I have spent 42 standard cycles arranging bones, cataloguing teeth, and writing little golden plaques that explain, in very simple language, why certain species no longer exist. It is, honestly, a wonderful job, mostly because the species that fill my cases cannot argue back. Until last Tuesday, the museum had been running a special exhibition, Apex Predators of the Forgotten Age. We had sourced specimens from 43 star systems. We had fossils of the Greth Moor, a 6-limbed ocean terror from the Delvan Nebula. We had preserved claw sets from the Hollow Serpent of Mura 4. We had the complete skeleton of a tusk bull from the Keren Steppe Moons. And as the centerpiece of the entire exhibit, proudly lit by 3 angled spotlights and surrounded by a velvet rope of deep burgundy, we had a Dragon King skull. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with the Dragon King, allow me to explain, because the plaque I wrote was truly excellent and I am very proud of it. The Dragon King was a mythological apex creature, allegedly of biological origin, believed to have once roamed a remote and unremarkable backwater planet in the outer spiral arm. The creature, per all available research literature, was enormous, bipedal, scaled, fire-producing, and deeply, deeply extinct. The skull in our possession measured 4.7 meters from snout to cranial ridge. The teeth were thick, blunt, and enormous. The jaw architecture suggested a bite force strong enough to crush reinforced alloy. My plaque read, and I quote from memory because I wrote it at 2 in the morning with a very strong cup of Vorreth tea: Dragon King, species mythological, origin uncertain, status extinct. Notable feature: a dominant predator whose legacy passed entirely into legend before the rise of any surviving civilization in its system. Beautiful, professional, absolutely bulletproof, or so I thought. The human showed up on a Wednesday morning, which is already a suspicious time to arrive anywhere. Most of the alien tour groups came in organized clusters on weekends. The school field trips came on Mondays. But Wednesdays were for the wanderers, the academics, the ones who read every single plaque and then stood very still and made a face. His name, according to the visitor registration log, was Mako Tessler. He was from Earth. He worked according to the single line of occupation he had filled in as a paleontologist, though that word means something slightly different for us now. I had no idea what that meant. I found out. Mako Tessler was not tall. He was not particularly large. He had brown skin, short hair going slightly grey at the sides, and he was wearing what humans apparently consider professional clothing, which is to say a jacket with elbow patches and shoes that had seen better decades. He walked through the first wing of the exhibition with his hands behind his back, which is a posture I have learned, through painful experience, means a visitor is either deeply bored or dangerously interested. He paused at the Greth Moor fossil for approximately 12 seconds. He spent 40 seconds at the Hollow Serpent. He gave the tusk bull a polite nod, which is a level of casual disrespect for a 9-meter predator skeleton that I found mildly offensive on its behalf. And then he reached the Dragon King. He stopped. He tilted his head. He leaned forward, hands still behind his back, nose approximately 3 centimeters from the velvet rope, and he stared at that skull for a very, very long time. I was watching from the upper observation gallery. I tell myself this is routine. I tell myself all senior curators monitor their exhibitions from above. This is true. It is also true that something about Mako Tessler made the small hairs on my secondary neck ridge stand up, and I have learned to listen to those hairs. He read my plaque. He read it again, and then, very quietly, in a voice that was clearly talking to himself and not intended for anyone else, he said, "Huh, just that, huh." 1 syllable, 1 small, unimpressive syllable, and somehow it contained within it the energy of an entire collapsed star. I came down from the gallery. This is not standard procedure. Senior curators do not descend to the floor to address individual visitors who have said "huh" to a plaque. But again, the neck hairs, they are rarely wrong. "Can I help you?" I asked, and I used my most professionally neutral voice, which I have been told sounds either very calm or very threatening, depending on the listener species. Mako Tessler straightened up and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as delighted, which is absolutely not the expression visitors usually have when approached by museum staff. Usually it is guilt, because they have touched something, or fear, because I am quite tall. "Are you the curator for this wing?" he asked. "Senior curator," I said, because I worked hard for that word and I use it whenever possible. "Fantastic," he said. "I have a question about your Dragon King." "Of course," I said. "What would you like to know?" He pointed at the skull. Specifically, he pointed at the teeth. "Where?" he said, very pleasantly. "Did you find this?" I told him. The skull had been acquired through the Rennick collection, a private archaeological estate sold to the museum 70 years ago by the estate of one Lord Pavin Rennick, a collector of considerable wealth and questionable acquisition methods. The documentation listed the skull's origin as recovered from deep geological strata, outer spiral arm system, planet designation uninhabited and unregistered. Mako nodded slowly as I spoke. He had the look of a person receiving information they already know, which is an extremely specific and slightly irritating look. "And you identified it as a Dragon King," he said. "Based on established xeno-paleontological literature?" "Yes," I said. "The morphology matches the mythological descriptions recorded by 3 separate civilizations that had contact with the outer spiral arm region. The size, the cranial ridge structure, the scale impressions preserved on the upper jaw." "The teeth," Mako said. "Yes, the teeth are consistent with..." "Are they?" he said, and now he had a different expression, not the delighted one, something quieter, something that, I would realize only later, was the particular look a person wears when they are about to completely, politely, and professionally destroy something you believe to be true. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, which already made me nervous because visitors are not supposed to have things in their pockets near the exhibits, and he produced a small folded piece of paper. He unfolded it. He held it up beside the skull. It was a photograph, a diagram actually, a dental anatomy chart. "The back teeth," he said, pointing to the skull. "The flat ones. The ones your literature describes as grinding teeth for crushing bone." "Yes," I said. "They're molars," he said. "Correct. Yes. Consistent with..." "No," he said very gently. "I mean they're human molars. Those are human molars, scaled up by a factor of about 45 give or take. But the cusp pattern, the fissure morphology, the root structure, that's a human molar." I looked at the skull. I looked at his chart. I looked at the skull again. "That," I said slowly, "is not possible." "And yet," said Mako Tessler, with the patience of a man who has had this exact conversation before in some form and knows exactly how it ends. The silence in the third wing of the Galactic Heritage Museum was, at that moment, profound. The Greth Mar loomed in the background. The hollow serpent cast long shadows. The tusk bull stood 9 meters tall and said nothing, because it was a skeleton and had no opinions. And in the center of it all, under 3 spotlights and behind a burgundy velvet rope, was a skull with human teeth. "I need," I said carefully, "to make a phone call." "Take your time," said Mako. He put the chart away. He looked up at the skull with an expression that I would only much later learn to identify correctly. It was not satisfaction. It was not smugness. It was recognition. I did not understand that yet. I was still processing the molars. My phone call went to Director Vos Carrith, head of the entire museum, who had been in a budget meeting for the past 3 hours, and answered with the voice of someone who has heard enough bad news for one lifetime and is not prepared for more. "The Dragon King skull," I said, "may have an authenticity issue." "Define authenticity issue," said Director Carrith. "A human visitor has identified the teeth as human in origin." There was a pause. "Draven," said Director Carrith, "the Dragon King skull is 4.7 meters long. I am aware of its dimensions, yes. It is a mythological creature from ancient galactic legend. Also aware. Humans are," he paused, searching for the diplomatic phrasing, "git a young species. The human standing next to it has a dental anatomy chart," I said. "He seems very sure." Another pause, longer this time. "Is he still there?" I looked over at Mako Tessler, who had, while I was on the phone, produced a small notebook from another pocket and was writing things down with a pencil, completely at ease, standing next to our 4.7-meter mythological centerpiece like a man who has nowhere else to be and all the time in the world. "Yes," I said. "He appears to be taking notes." Director Carrith said a word in his native Vorrethian dialect that is technically untranslatable but functionally means, "Oh, we are in genuine trouble now." He arrived in the third wing 11 minutes later. He brought the head of the research division, a very serious woman named Prella Vos Ankh, who carried a scanning device and the expression of someone who was already composing her resignation letter in her head, just in case. Mako Tessler greeted them politely. He shook Director Carrith's hand, which surprised the director because Vorrethians do not typically shake hands, and he had not been prepared for the gesture but recovered admirably. Prella Vos Ankh did not shake hands. She was already aiming the scanner at the skull. So said Director Carrith, in the voice he used for donors and difficult journalists. I understand you have some thoughts about our exhibition. Just one really, said Mako. Your Dragon King isn't a Dragon King. And what? Said Director Carrith, with tremendous composure. Do you believe it is? Mako looked at the skull. He looked at it the way he had been looking at it since he arrived. That quiet look, that recognition look. I think, he said, it's one of ours. The scanner beeped. Prella Vos Ankh looked at the reading. She looked at the skull. She looked at the reading again. She said nothing. Which I had learned over 12 years of working with her, meant that the reading had said something she was not yet ready to say out loud. Prella, said Director Carrith. The mineral composition, she said slowly, as if each word cost her something, is consistent with a geological origin in an outer spiral arm system. Specifically, she paused, the isotope ratios are flagging a match to a planet designation we have on file. What planet? I asked. She looked at me, then at Mako, then at the skull. The system the humans call Sol, she said. Third planet. The third wing of the Galactic Heritage Museum was, for a long moment, completely, utterly and absolutely silent. Mako Tessler clicked his pen closed. He put his notebook back in his pocket, and then he looked up at the skull, and for just a moment before he put his professional face back on, he let himself smile, and it was not a small smile. Well, he said to no one in particular and all of us at once, now you know where the legend came from. The silence lasted exactly 7 seconds. I counted. I had nothing else to do while my entire professional career was quietly rearranging itself into a shape I did not recognize. Director Carrith broke it first, because he is a man who has survived 40 years in museum administration by moving very quickly through the 5 stages of institutional grief and arriving at damage control before anyone else in the room has finished processing stage 1. Right, he said, clapping his hands together once. Let us not be dramatic. Mako Tessler looked at him with an expression of genuine admiration. You're very calm, he said. I am not calm, said Director Carrith pleasantly. I am performing calm. There is a significant difference, and I have had a great deal of practice. Prella Vos Ankh was still staring at her scanner. She had run the isotope analysis 3 times now, which was 2 more times than necessary, and she was doing it a 4th time, which told everyone present that she was hoping the machine would eventually get tired of being right and change its answer. It did not. Sol system, she said again, quieter this time, as if saying it softly might make it less catastrophic. Third planet. And the geological strata dating on the bone matrix is, she stopped. Is what? I asked, because I am, apparently, committed to making my own situation worse at every possible opportunity. Old, she said. Very old. Pre-civilization old. The kind of old that suggests this specimen existed before any recorded intelligent species in that system. We all looked at Mako. Mako, to his credit, did not look smug. He looked like a man sitting across from someone who has just opened a gift they did not expect, and is watching their face very carefully. Your species is young, Director Carrith said. It was not a question, exactly. It was the sound of a man gently attempting to dismantle a conclusion before it fully forms. Our recorded history is young, Mako said. Our biology is not as straightforward a question as people usually assume. The skull, said Prella, without looking up, is approximately 47,000 years old by conservative estimation. Director Carrith turned slowly to look at me. I want to be very clear that I, Draven Oxis, senior curator of the Third Wing, did not write the provenance documentation for the Rennick collection. I inherited it. I catalogued what was already catalogued. I put a plaque on what was already displayed. I am, in every meaningful legal and professional sense, a victim of circumstances. I said none of this out loud because there was a human in the room, and the moment did not call for self-preservation speeches. The Rennick collection, I said instead, very carefully, was acquired through processes that in retrospect perhaps warranted more rigorous documentation review. Said Director Carrith, which is Vorrethian for you will be writing a very long report about this. Mako had drifted back toward the skull. He was looking at the jaw now, specifically the area just behind the front teeth, tracing the shape of the dental ridge with his eyes, hands still behind his back, still not touching anything, which frankly I appreciated because at least one person in the room was respecting the velvet rope. "Can I ask you something?" he said, without turning around. "You may ask," said Director Carrith, with the tone of a man who is mentally prepared for every possible question and is reasonably confident he can handle whatever comes. "How many other pieces in this museum came from the Rennick collection?" The confidence left Director Carrith's face with the speed and grace of a creature sensing a predator. "That," he said, "is a number we would need to check. How many other pieces in this museum came from the outer spiral arm in general?" Mako continued, still looking at the skull. Director Carrith looked at me. I looked at the floor, briefly, and then back up, because looking at the floor solves nothing but sometimes you need 1 second. "Roughly," I said, 112 catalogued items across all 6 wings, give or take. The number sat in the room like an uninvited guest who had just helped themselves to the food and was clearly planning to stay. Mako turned around. His expression was pleasant. It was professionally, carefully, deliberately pleasant, and I was beginning to understand that when this man's face went particularly pleasant, it meant the opposite of pleasant things were occurring in his mind. "I work for an organization called the Terran Reclamation and Heritage Office," he said. "It was established about 15 years ago, after first contact, specifically to address the fact that a significant number of Earth-origin artifacts had made their way into off-world collections through various channels over the past several thousand years." "Several thousand years," repeated Director Carrith. "Earth has been visited," said Mako with magnificent understatement, "more than once, by more than one species, over a fairly long period of time, and not all of those visitors left empty-handed. There it was, out in the air, no taking it back." Director Carrith sat down in one of the visitor benches near the Tusk Bull display, which is not standard behavior for the director of the Galactic Heritage Museum but which struck me, at that moment, as entirely reasonable. "How many artifacts?" he said, in a voice stripped completely of performance. Just genuine exhausted inquiry. "Are we talking about globally, across all collections, all institutions?" Mako picked up his notebook again. He flipped to a page near the middle. He looked at something written there, and then looked at Director Carrith with an expression that managed to be sympathetic while still being devastating. "The current running estimate," he said, "is somewhere in the range of 14,000 catalogued items, possibly more. Many are in private collections, some are in research institutions, a number are in museums." He paused. "Good museums, actually. Respected ones, the kind that have very nice plaques." He did not look at me when he said that. He absolutely did not have to. 14,000, I said, because the number was too large to just let pass in silence. "Conservative estimate," Mako said, with the brightness of a man who has had months to adjust to this figure and no longer feels its full weight on his chest. "And the Dragon King's skull," said Prella, who had finally put down her scanner and was now standing with her arms folded in the posture of a scientist who has accepted an unwelcome truth and is already thinking about the methodology for the follow-up study. "If it is not a Dragon King, what is it?" Mako looked at the skull. He looked at it for a long moment, and in that moment the pleasant professional mask slipped just slightly, and underneath it was something I had not expected. Not triumph, not the satisfaction of being right. Something more complicated, something almost tender. "We have a lot of myths on Earth," he said. "Stories that go back further than our written records. Creatures that breathed fire, that ruled the mountains and the sky, that were slain by heroes or bargained with by kings." He paused. "For a long time we thought they were just stories, metaphors, symbols, the kind of thing early humans invented to explain things they didn't understand." "And now," said Director Carrith, quietly. "And now," said Mako, "we find specimens in alien museums." He said it without drama, without any particular flourish, just stated it the way you state a thing that is true and has been true for a long time and simply needed someone to say it clearly in the right room. "This animal was real," he said. "Whatever it was, whatever it could actually do, it was a real biological creature that lived on Earth. And someone at some point took a piece of it, and it ended up here, and your civilization built a mythology around it." He looked at Director Carrith, which is genuinely impressive, by the way. Most species that come across anomalous specimens just file them and forget them. You made it a legend. That takes cultural creativity. Director Carrith stared at him. "I cannot tell," said the director. "If you are complimenting us." "I absolutely am," said Mako. "I just also need the skull back." And there it was. Not asked aggressively, not demanded with diplomatic weight or legal threat or the kind of formal language that institutional disputes usually arrive in. Just stated. Clean and simple, and entirely immovable. I need the skull back. The skull, said Director Carrith, recovering with impressive speed, is the centerpiece of a special exhibition that has been marketed across 12 star systems, with advanced ticket sales that— I know, said Mako. He reached into his jacket again, and this time produced not a chart or a notebook, but a very official-looking document printed on what I recognized as Galactic Heritage Council letterhead. He placed it on the visitor bench beside Director Carrith with the calm of a man who came prepared for every version of this conversation. That's the formal reclamation notice, he said. It gives you 60 days to transition the exhibit. We provide a certified replica for display purposes. Full scientific credit goes to the museum for the isotope analysis and discovery documentation, and we make a joint statement to the Galactic press about the cooperative nature of the transfer. Cooperative, said Director Carrith, looking at the document. I find, said Mako pleasantly, that things go much better when we call them cooperative. Director Carrith read the document. Prella vos Unk came to read over his shoulder. I stood slightly to the side, because I am a senior curator and not a director, and the only role I could usefully play at this point was witness. The third wing was quiet around us. The Grethmore stood in the dim lighting of its alcove. The hollow serpent stretched across its display wall. The tusk bull presided over the room with 9 meters of uncomplicated legitimacy, because its bones were from the Curran steppe moons and no one was coming to claim them. And above us all, lit by 3 spotlights, the Dragon King's skull looked down at the room with its enormous jaw and its ancient bone and its very specifically, very identifiably human molars. I stared at it. I had walked past it for 2 years. I had written its plaque. I had pointed it out to school groups and visiting academics and dignitary tours, and once, memorably, a delegation from the outer cluster who had wept at the sight of it, because in their culture the Dragon King is a holy figure associated with the creation of the stars. I had never once looked at the teeth closely enough. Dr. Tessler, I said, and he looked at me, and I asked the question that had been growing in the back of my mind since Prella had said Sol System, 3rd planet, the mythology on Earth, the dragon legends. Did your people, did humans ever think they were real? Before first contact, before the reclamation work, did anyone ever seriously argue that these creatures actually existed? Mako smiled. Not the pleasant professional one, a real one. There was a whole field of enthusiasts, he said, mostly dismissed as fringe. Some of them dedicated their entire lives to it, got laughed out of academic circles regularly. He looked up at the skull. Turns out the problem wasn't that they were wrong. The problem was that they were looking in the wrong places. The bones weren't on Earth anymore. He paused. Someone had already taken them. The weight of that sat on everyone in the room differently. On Director Carrith it sat like paperwork. On Prella it sat like a research question. On me it sat like the very specific shame of a man who had written a plaque that was going to end up in a How Museums Get It Wrong lecture somewhere. On Mako Tessler it sat lightly, because he had already done his grieving for it. He had picked up the weight of it, carried it across the galaxy, and set it down in the right room. 60 days, said Director Carrith, finally. 60 days, confirmed Mako, and you will provide a replica, a very good one, indistinguishable at normal viewing distance. We have a whole department. Director Carrith folded the document. He held it in both hands for a moment, looking at nothing in particular, and then he did something I had not expected from him in my 12 years under his administration. He laughed. A short, tired, genuine laugh. 40 years in this institution, he said. I have dealt with forgeries, with contested provenance, with 3 separate incidents involving cursed artifacts from the Velen cluster, and one deeply unfortunate situation with a living specimen that was incorrectly labeled as preserved. He shook his head. I never once thought I would have to return something to a species because we had accidentally turned their wildlife into a religion. Mako laughed too, a real one, warm and easy. In fairness, he said, you made an excellent religion out of it. The Dragon King mythology across 20 civilizations is remarkably consistent. Strong emphasis on wisdom, power, ancient authority. Your people looked at this skull and built something genuinely beautiful around it. Cold comfort, said Director Carrith, but not unkindly. It is a little warm, said Mako. If you squint. They shook hands. Prella scheduled the scanning sessions. I began, quietly, mentally composing a revised plaque. Something honest, something that told the real story. Specimen of uncertain species, origin Earth, status of creature unknown. Notable feature, present across the mythologies of 23 civilizations, built from a single recovered skull, proof that the universe tells the same stories in different languages, when the evidence is spectacular enough. Mako walked toward the exit, and then stopped. He turned around one last time, and looked at the Dragon King, and I watched him look at it, and I understood something then that I had not understood at the beginning of the day. He had not come here just to reclaim a specimen, he had come to see it, to see what 23 civilizations had built around one piece of his world's history. To stand in the museum that had accidentally, unintentionally, in complete good faith honored something from Earth so completely that it had become a sacred legend across the stars. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned back to the exit, put his notebook in his pocket, and walked out of the third wing of the Galactic Heritage Museum of Vorreth Prime, leaving behind 3 stunned museum professionals and one skull that had just become, in the span of a single Wednesday morning, considerably more complicated. I sat down on the visitor bench next to Director Carrith. We both looked at the Dragon King. "Draven?" said Director Carrith. "Yes, Director. You are going to write a very thorough report." "I am already writing it in my head, Director." "And then," he said, "you are going to go through every single item in the Rennick collection." I closed my eyes briefly. 112 items, 6 wings, 42 cycles of assumptions. "And if I find more," I said. Director Carrith stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked at the skull one last time. "Then," he said, with the composure of a man who has performed calm for 4 decades and is very, very tired, "we are going to need a much larger phone." He walked out. I stayed. I looked at the Dragon King's skull, at the impossible scale of it, at the 4.7 meters of ancient bone under 3 spotlights, at the teeth that had started this whole catastrophic, fascinating, completely unprecedented Wednesday. And then I picked up my pen, and I started writing a new plaque.